Welcome back to Intro to World Music, Music 239. And we are continuing our study of African American music today with a discussion on spirituals. You'll find some information on spirituals on the PowerPoint presentation, but we also have a guest lecturer, performer today, Dr. Richard Todd Payne, who is on the faculty here at Missouri State. We'll be talking about his experiences in the performance and the research on this particular area. So we hope you enjoy his performance and his lecture.
Okay, thank you for having me. And before I start my presentation, let me just ask a question. How many of you all have heard Negro spirituals? You know, I mean, you've actually heard one, okay? For those of you who raised your hand, can you tell me the names of one that you've heard before? Yeah.
Deep River?
Deep River, yeah. So, did you have your hand raised? Someone else had their hand raised. Yes, sir. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And did you have your hand raised?
Yeah.
Okay. Who else had their hand raised? Yeah, ma'am. Over my head. Okay. So, Negro spirituals, they are the spontaneous outbursts of intense religious fervor. In other words, you know, they come from the soul. They were never composed. No one actually sat down and began to write them. They just come from experiences of what slaves had to endure during that time of slavery. And in the spirituals, the Negro, he talks of his troubles, his hopes, he talks about his fears, and he holds a personal communion with God. And I think that's relative to any songs that you sing today. There may be certain songs that touch you like nothing ever will, and it makes you feel better. And this is how the spirituals made the slaves feel. As I said, they were never composed, and they sprang into life from the souls of slaves from the cotton and cornfields on the plantations in the South. For instance, one of the songs that they used to sing while they were out chopping cotton was a piece entitled, "My Lord, What a Morning." And it went something like this. My Lord, what a morning. My Lord, what a morning. Oh, my Lord, what a morning. When the stars begin to fall, you'll hear the trumpet sound to wake the nations underground. Looking to my God's right hand when the stars begin to fall. Another spiritual that you might have heard slaves sing while they were out working was one entitled, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh, yes, Lord. While the work songs, spirituals that is, dealt only with their daily life, spirituals, they were inspired by the message of Jesus Christ and his good news of the Bible, which basically said that you can be saved. And this is what the slaves believed in. They are different, the spirituals are. They're different from hymns that we may sing in church today. They're different from psalms because they were a way of sharing the hard condition of being a slave. When blacks were brought to this country as slaves, they were forced to abandon their African culture. Slaveholders did not allow dancing and playing drums as what was usual in Africa, in the African culture. Since slaves weren't allowed to converse freely, they used the spirituals to transmit secret messages by creating and incorporating euphemisms into their songs that enabled them to communicate. They also had meetings at secret places, which were called like camp meetings, or which were called like bush meetings, because they needed to meet with one another and share their joys, pains, and hope. And in terms of communicating, one example of a song such as that would be the tune Steal Away. Have anybody ever heard Steal Away, the spiritual? It was passed on from one person to another, and it was used to indicate that a secret religious meeting would take place. For instance, you might hear a slave in the community just started singing, steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus, steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here. And that was a strong indication that there needed to be a meeting, a gathering. The question would be, well, when are we supposed to get together? And you would hear this in the second verse of this tune, when someone would say, my Lord, he calls me by the thunder. The trumpet sounds within of my soul. I ain't got long to stay here. He calls me by the thunder simply meant that if there was a storm or if there was lightning and you hear a loud clap of thunder, that was an indication of it's time to meet. It's time to gather and to fellowship with one another. Continuing on about the codes. The codes of the first Negro spirituals are often related with an escape to freedom other than a gathering. Such songs as My Home, or a slave song entitled Sweet Canaan, or The Promised Land, they all represented a safe place where everyone could live free. And this place at that time that slaves were referring to was a country on the northern side of the Ohio River. They called that river the Jordan River because it represented freedom. The ways used by slaves running to a free country were riding a chariot or a train. The Negro spirituals wade in the water, or the gospel train and swing low sweet chariot directly refer to the Underground Railroad, which was an organization used to help slaves be free. And notice I said the Underground Railroad. One of the greatest slaves to have lived, her name was Harriet Tubman. And history teaches us that she freed hundreds, even thousands of slaves by using this Underground Railroad. So if you ever would like to do some research or just read up on her, her name is Harriet Tubman. The last name is spelled Tubman. Fascinating woman. A fugitive could use it in several ways. That is, the songs referring to escaping to freedom. First, they had to walk at night using hand lights and moonlight. When they needed to, they would wade in the water so that dogs could not smell their tracks. Second, they jumped into a chariot where they could hide and ride away. So again, the Negro spirituals like wade in the water, the gospel train, and swing low sweet chariot all refer to the Underground Railroad. So if you heard a slave saying, wade in the water, children, wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water. Another signal to a slave who was considering escaping. If you go through the water and you get to the other side, when the dogs and their masters, slaves' masters, come after you, immediately they're going to lose your scent. That was the code. The words of the gospel train are, she's a-coming, get on board, there's room for many or more. This is a direct call to escape by riding a train which stopped at stations. And you would hear something like this. The gospel train is a-comin', I hear it just at hand. I hear them car wheels rumbling and rolling through the land. Oh, get on board, little children, get on board. Little children, get on board. Little children, there's room for many a more. The tune Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, it refers to Ripley, which was a station of the Underground Railroad where fugitive slaves, they were welcomed. This town was atop of a hill by the Ohio River, which wasn't easy to cross. So to reach this place, fugitives had to wait for help coming from the hill. So again, another code. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. And here's the code here. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home, which is referring to that train that's coming. I hear it. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Moving right along from codes to give you just a little bit more history about the process of Negro spirituals as they began to grow. They were inspired by African music, even if the tunes were sometimes not far from the tunes we sing as hymns in church. Some of these spirituals were referred to as shouts, and they were accompanied with typical dancing and hand clapping and foot tapping. And even today, now, especially in an African American church, when you hear spirituals, sometimes someone would have a tambourine if they didn't have drums like they do today, and they would just play a certain beat, and you would hear people sing a song such as, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Oh, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Some African American religious singing at this time was referred to as a moan or a groan. Now, a moan or a groan does not actually mean that I'm in pain or I'm hurting or whatever. A moan or a groan simply has to do with, according to research, a deep spiritual fervor, a deep connection to that song. Let me ask you a question, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a spiritual, but I'm sure we all have just that one song that you could be doing anything, and at the drop of a hat, when you hear it, there's just something inside of you that just says, that's my song, I've got to hear it. One of my favorite songs, of course, you heard it a few minutes ago, The Thrill Is Gone. Some of you didn't see me, but I walked through that door, and the minute I heard it, everything just stopped. When it comes to a moan or a groan, again, technically, when you hear someone sing, it sounds like they're really putting a lot of tension on their chords, but it's not coming from a mechanical perspective. Again, it comes from deep, deep inside because of how they feel. For example, and again, this has to do with spirituals. I'm a poor little orphan in this world. I'm a poor little orphan in this world. I'm a poor little orphan in this world. Good Lord, can't stay here by myself. Then it would get so moving to a slave, you might hear them start moaning. Same thing. Mm-hmm. Somebody may start just waving their hand because they're so emotional. Mm-hmm. 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 Good Lord, can't stay here by myself. Oh. A spiritual entitled There's a Balm in Gilead is pretty well known, and it has an interesting meaning. Quoted from the Old Testament, there's a balm in Gilead cannot heal sinners. But the lyrics of this spiritual refer to the New Testament. In the New Testament, the four Gospels say that Jesus healed many people, whatever their conditions. Therefore, slaves believe that a Christian who feels the Spirit must share its faith, preach like Peter, and pray like Paul. So in the book of Jeremiah, several verses speak about Gilead. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. Sometimes I feel discouraged and think my work's in vain, but then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again. There are many authors of Negro spirituals. Some of them are known and some of them are not. After the Civil War, many African American musicians, they began to arrange Negro spirituals. And as I said at the very beginning, they were never composed. So these melodies were passed down from one generation to another. And eventually they found their way to manuscripts where composers began just to arrange them according to how they heard them. One of the arrangers of Negro spirituals was Harry Thacker Burleigh. He's one of my favorite composers. And he wrote the famous tune that someone just mentioned. Who mentioned Deep River? They heard Deep River? Yes. He wrote Deep River. However, Harry Thacker Burleigh used to listen to his grandfather, who was a slave, sang Negro spirituals. So there was his inspiration. He graduated in New York at the Institute of Musical Art. And you would hear his composition, Deep River, my home is over Jordan. Deep River, Lord, I want to cross over into campground. Following Harry Thacker Burleigh, another great composer and arranger of spirituals was a man by the name of Hall Johnson. Born in Athens, Georgia, his father gave him the opportunity to hear Negro spirituals. He acquired his musical training in several institutions, and he's best known for an upbeat spiritual entitled Ride On, King Jesus, no man can hinder me. Ride on, King Jesus, ride on, no man can hinder me. From the spirituals, as they began to grow, another genre of music began to take place after them, which is gospel music, which was derived from spirituals, has the same meaning. Despite its immense popularity, widespread appeal, and influence on American popular music, black gospel music is a comparably recent music phenomenon. Rooted in the religious songs of the late 19th century urban revival, spirituals, also blues and ragtime, gospel music emerged early into the 20th century. The term gospel music suggests many things to different people. In its most general application, the word simply refers to any religious music, regardless of the music's age or origin. Congregational songs, ring shouts, quartets, sacred harp choirs, sanctified groups, and even some work songs would all qualify. Less broadly, the term gospel refers to an innovative, popular style of music combining secular forms, particularly ragtime and blues, with religious texts. One of the greatest gospel songs. How many of us have heard the tune, Precious Lord, Take My Hand, by a show of hands? Great. What you may not know is how that song was composed. Thomas Dorsey, known as the father of gospel music, got his inspiration from spirituals. He did not just simply sit down and write that song. He dealt with some pain in his own life, just like slaves when they were singing tunes. Those tunes that they performed came from the hardships that they had to endure. And I'd like to share with you what Thomas Dorsey said that helped him to write this tune. On a recording, you would hear him say something such as, blues, jazz, and the gospel. I want to talk to you today about gospel because that's the music that I used to go into. I was getting ready to play a revival in Chicago, and I left my wife in bed, sleep. And it was a great year for my wife and I because we were anticipating our first child, and so I was extremely enthusiastic. On the last night of the revival, a young man came up to me with a telegram, and the telegram read, "Your wife just died. Come home." So I could not finish the revival. And it was so. When I got home, my wife was dead. They had never removed the body. So I buried my wife and the baby in the same casket. After that, I was just so tore up on the inside. I wanted to go back to playing the blues. I didn't care about gospel music anymore. Finally, I found myself and one of my best friends, Mr. Fry, and I, we were in a practice room just browsing over the piano keys, and seemingly the words just began to fall into place like water from the crevices of a rock. Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me on, let me stand. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn. Through the storms, through the night, lead me on, precious Lord. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. Lord, I'm so tired. Master, I'm weak. Lord, I'm worn. Through the storms, through the night, lead me on to that old light, and take my hand, and precious Lord, lead me on. You know, I talked to you a few minutes back in the lecture about how some slave songs were referred to as a moan or a groan. Well, that style of singing was carried over into gospel music. And again, it doesn't imply pain, just a deep connection. One of the great spirituals that eventually was turned into a gospel song, and that type of singing was implied to it, was the spiritual Over My Head. And you would hear somebody sing, over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Gospel music was used in many different formats in a church service. In a traditional African American church, at the very beginning of the service, the minister would come up and he would say something such as, the Lord is in his holy temple, let all earth keep silent. And that was a sign to let the church, the African American church, know, okay, service is taking place, let's get our minds focused on what's getting ready to take place. Then you would have a choir. Someone would be at the piano. At this time now, piano is being used. And so you have the choir all dressed in robes, and they're all standing at attention, hands behind their back, and they're marching from side to side up the aisle. And you would hear them sing a song such as, "We come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in his holy word. He never failed me yet. Oh, can't turn around. We've come this far by faith." Then we would get to a point in that same service where they would have what will simply be called the altar call. That's when people would come up to the altar and kneel and pray. Then you would hear another traditional gospel song such as, "I must tell Jesus." Now we've gone from upbeat to more serene. "All of my troubles, I cannot bear these burdens alone. In my distress, he kindly will help me. He ever loves and cares for his own. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus. Jesus can help me, Jesus alone." Service beginning to progress, and right before the minister would stand up to to preach, he would always turn and say, "Before I give you today's word, I would love if the choir would give us either an A and B selection," meaning two pieces. And sometimes the choir would sing one, sometimes they would sing two. But traditionally, you would hear this tune. "Amazing grace shall always be my song of praise, for it was grace that bought my liberty. I do not know just why he came to love me so. He looked beyond my faults and saw my needs." Historically, the revivals in which spirituals and gospel music played a big role in, that's when you would hear someone tell stories about how back in the day, unlike today's churches where you have so many instruments, but you would hear someone stand up and say, "I remember back in the day when there was no piano, there was no tambourine or nothing, and someone would just strike out on the note, and then everyone would join in. And since I don't have the gospel choir behind me, I'll try to be one person plus the gospel choir." But you would hear someone in church just start saying something like, "I love the Lord, and he heard my cry." Then the whole congregation would come in, "I love the Lord. He heard my cry." And it would go on, and it would just simply continue. Black gospel music has changed a lot since the middle 1950s. It's become more sophisticated, particularly in terms of marketing and musical diversity. Popular singers such as the late Reverend James Cleveland and Andre Crouch have had formal musical training and education, which have led to more complicated arrangements. All these changes are part of a natural musical and cultural evolution. The principal mission of black gospel music and spirituals remains the same, and that is to uplift the human spirit. Spirituals not only influenced gospel music, not only influenced blues, but How many of you all love hip hop? I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, I'll raise my hand with you, you know. You don't have to be bashful. I love hip hop. Spirituals influence hip hop. And you may ask the question, well, Dr. Payne, how so? How did spirituals influence hip hop? Well, that's simple. Remember early on in the lecture, I said to you that these songs were never composed. Slaves never sit down and began to write them. However, they just began to use their creative minds and they began to sing. And the words just began to come, manifest themselves from within them. Okay? Did they rhyme? Maybe sometimes, but not a lot. Now, almost 300, 400, 500 years later, you have some of the world's famous artists. And I'm not going to name any because I'm sure you have your own preferable artists in the world of hip hop. That's how they come up with so many lyrics. They're talking about their life's experiences. Also, there's an art form today called freestyle, where someone would just sit there and just say something such as, when I moved up north, people all growled. A boy from the south who was on the prowl with a big bass voice. They couldn't resist to try to top my singing, but they can't touch this. Slaves did it. And now hip hop artists, they're doing it, freestyling. I want to leave you with this. Gospel music and spirituals. And I think not just those two art forms, but all different types of music. They have one thing in common, and I believe this is something that we all can relate to. They simply represent freedom, the need to be free. Again, as I said before, you know, I'm sure if I were to ask you, would you be so kind to tell me the name of a song, you know, that just moves you, I mean, just gets you up out of your seat and makes you feel like that I can accomplish anything on this earth. That's what spirituals were to slaves. That's what gospel music was to African Americans. And now that the world is becoming so diverse, now you see people of all races and of all nationalities enjoying gospel music that I grew up on, singing the styles of gospel music that I sang, you know, and of course, you know, loving hip hop. But again, it's all about freedom. And I believe that freedom started back many, many, many years ago when slavery was beginning to come to an end, when the late Abraham Lincoln wrote these words in the Emancipation Proclamation, that on the first day of January in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. The Emancipation Proclamation was the most revolutionary action ever taken by an American president. When Abraham Lincoln signed the final proclamation on January 1, 1863, he said, and I quote, "If my name goes down in history, it will be for this act." Abraham Lincoln was quoted as saying two important quotes in regards to the Emancipation Proclamation. He said, "We must free the slaves or be ourselves subdued." Secondly, he said, "I am naturally anti-slavery. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. I cannot remember when I did not so think and feel." Also, speaking of freedom, I truly do believe that if the great, late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were alive today, and he witnessed a lot of the events that have happened on this planet, such as September the 11th, the war in Iraq, the riots out in LA involving civilian Rodney King and the LA police, or even recently, and I'm sure you may have seen this on the news, the young lady, young pregnant lady in Ohio, you know, who was recently found and murdered, you know, by her boyfriend for whatever reasons, we don't know. But when it comes to freedom, I believe that if Dr. Martin Luther King was here, I believe that he would still say with a feeling and a fervor the same words that he used, that he delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., August the 28th, 1963, when he simply said, I still have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with a new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so, let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Thank you. If you have any questions, whatever, don't be bashful. I'll answer it to the best of my ability. Yes, sir. Because of their camp meetings, and they would just talk. You have to understand that when slaves were brought over from Africa, they spoke several languages. They were in their own tribes where they understood one another. So now they're brought to a country where maybe one tribe is with another tribe and they don't actually speak the same language. So as they began to sing these songs, they also began to share, what those codes mean. No one just heard someone singing it and said, okay, now what does that mean? Or no one just heard it and thought, oh, so that means for me to escape and go through the water, to escape my slave master and the dogs. No, when they congregated, just like I said in the spiritual still away, my Lord, he calls me by the thunder. When they congregated, that's when they began to share their hopes and share their struggles. But it is believed that they also shared those signals, because if they didn't share those signals, then no one would have known, how, what it actually meant. That's a good question. I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
What was the name of the city that the slaves fled to?
Oh.
Is that still in existence?
No, it's not in existence. It was Ripley.
Ripley or
Yeah.
Ripley?
Yeah, Ripley.
Oh, thanks.
In Ohio. But no, that's long gone. And as a matter of fact, that was the same place that Harriet Tubman used to bring slaves to freedom. And again, I would encourage you, if you have a chance, read that book. It is truly, truly awesome about a woman who risked her life just to free, other slaves and bring them through the Underground Railroad. Yes.
The book, was it her biography or what was the name?
It's her biography. If you just look up Harriet Tubman, there may still be a documentary out. There was a movie that was put out maybe like 10 years ago, and an actress, if you know her, by the name of Cicely Tyson, she portrayed Harriet Tubman in a movie entitled A Woman Called Moses, and that was her nickname. They called her Moses, and one of the things that she would do, history teaches us, is that she would sleep during the day somewhere, but then she would travel by night because she know that way that slave masters, that they were looking for her, they wouldn't be able to find her. But the documentary is called A Woman Called Moses. But if you just type in Harriet Tubman, I'm sure you'll come up with tons of information. If you've ever heard Follow the Drinking Gourd, it's talking about the Big Dipper. Anybody ever seen the Big Dipper? I'm 41, I'm 40 years old. I've never seen the Big Dipper. I try to go out and put some stars together, and I didn't know what that meant, I studied science in elementary school, but I guess I didn't pay attention enough, but you would see in books the Big Dipper. And then as I grew and began to learn about spirituals, I realized that's what the slaves used when they said, follow the drinking gourd, follow the Big Dipper. That was another way of escaping freedom. Thank you for bringing that up, John. So now when you see the Big Dipper, you think, that's what slaves used, and they would sing a song called Follow the Drinking Gourd. Moses arranged spirituals, but some composers contemporary of the 20th century, they actually, and I mean this, they actually, began to write spirituals. They would take their own words and sit at the piano and start, maybe composing or arranging. But when it started out, no one never did that. They just passed tunes down from one person to the other, and they began to arrange them. But when you think of Moses Hogan, who is of the 20th century, he has spirituals where, he's, written actually on his own. There's another great composer who teaches at Florida State University. His name is Andre Thomas, and he wrote a choral arrangement of a piece called Keep Your Lamps Trimmed and Burning, Keep Your Lamps Trimmed and Burning. And believe it or not, that was another signal for slaves to, always keep your lamps on because the time is drawing nigh. What does the time drawing nigh mean? Getting ready to escape. So if you don't keep that lamp filled with oil or whatever, when you escape it, you might run out. Yes, sir.
It seems like a lot of the songs that we hear about are just the spirituals. Was there anything else that early African Americans would sing? Genres and styles at that time?
Yeah. Before gospel music, remember that emerged in the 20th century, but before gospel music, you had the blues, just like you were listening to earlier. You had simple folk songs. I don't know if you've ever heard of the story. I heard this when I was in elementary school, but there used to be that old folk song about John Henry, the steel driving man. John Henry told his captain, a man ain't nothing but a man. But before I let your drill beat me down, I'll die with the hammer in my hand. I can't believe I still remember that after all these years. Wow. But yeah, there were folk songs. And then from all of that, gospel music emerged, And then from that, you have your traditional gospel music emerge. Then from that, you had, your contemporary gospel music that's really upbeat. And believe it or not, now, we have gospel hip hop, and we have rock gospel, okay? And of course, you heard me try to do just a little bit of freestyling, but that even happens in gospel music, happened in spirituals, and I'm sure it even happened in the folk songs. And that sense of freestyling that I was talking to you about, it also happens in the blues. So that's going to be really exciting for you to sit down and just write your own blues lines. And I hope I don't get in trouble by sharing this with you, but B.B. King once said that the blues is just a person just going through some hard times. It could be anything. You could be sitting at your desk, no, no. I'm trying to write this 15-page paper, no, and I'm so tired, no. I gotta drink 8 cups of coffee, and then I'll be wild. I'm gonna finish this paper because I want it. A. See, I just made that up. So that's the blues. That's nothing. It feels good to hear, but there's nothing like happy about it. It's just the blues.
You know?
There's a hip hop artist out. You may know him. I think his name is Redman, and he was on MTV teaching this kid how to freestyle. And this is how I learned. He said, in your mind, when you have just one word that you will put at the end of a sentence, and then you have another word that you're thinking about that you put at the end of a sentence, then you fill in everything in between. You know, I mean, you could just start walking and you could sit here and say, man, I'm just really tired of walking. They are my friends. I think I'll start some talking. Talk about what? I don't know, but I'm going to do my best. Hey, yo. And there you go. That's freestyle. When they were brought over here, their English was really, really just non-existent, okay? So they had to learn the English that their slave masters, they heard them talk. And of course, it wasn't good. For example, in spirituals today, when you look at the music, you may see the word DE. You know, I know duh, but it means, of course, the word the. So that's a good question. Of course, spirituals originated from African music. Did slaves use their own language to incorporate into the spirituals? Honestly, I don't know. I just know that when I began to pick up manuscripts to look at spirituals, you saw different dialects. For instance, instead of the slaves saying the word river, they would say ribber, R-I-B-B-E-R, because that's the way they spoke. You know, or if they said the word Lord, they would spell it L-A-W-D. I know the Lord. Or what is it? Another way they would spell river is R-I-V-U-H. So it's river instead of river. This is what I believe. And I'm glad you asked that because, you know, you're teaching me too. But what I know mostly about slaves and Christianity is that when they were brought over here, you know, to America, they began to pick up Christianity, you know, first and foremost of all, you know, from their slave masters. You know, the slave masters went to church and they had to, you know, drive their wagons, you know, and they'd sit outside and wait for them. So they would hear what went on inside of churches, you know. And so somehow, some way, that was brought back into the camps. Yeah, but that's a good question. And that's something that I can go and extend my research on to know that, you know, when slaves were brought over here, were they already Christians? I'm sure chances are, being in Africa, they practiced their own religions. And then, you know, they brought it over here. Because remember, according to research, slave masters took away their dancing and took away, you know, their clapping. They couldn't, you know, they couldn't tap their feet. They couldn't dance. They couldn't do any of those things, you know. So now they have to learn a whole new language. So they started by listening to how their listen to how their slave masters talked. Well, I appreciate you having me, and good luck on writing your blues lines. You know, that's exciting. Wow, I wish I could take this class. So have fun doing that. So thank you, John, for having me.